Great.
Lessons learned. All right, attendees are starting to come in.
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We'll get started right on time. Yep, lots of people love beaches. There's 150 people who wanted to come to this webinar.
Holy moly.
Can we go to the beach?
Maybe
Maybe we got confused.
Like the Salmon Recovery Conference, we were there. There was just so many amazing people there that I haven't seen it in person for so long. And it's great seeing the participant list. Lots of those same people are there.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, can you email Wendell the link that you forwarded this morning?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Everybody gets the Jay's looking at a computer face.
My camera just switched. Okay, if you're just joining us, we're going to wait a couple minutes or 1 minute, let a few more folks into the room, and then we'll get started right away.
Tell you, this week is going to be a nice week to go visit the beach. It may be our warmest couple of days we've had in
Years.
quite some time. Feels like years.
And if you're just joining, we're waiting another 30 seconds and then we'll get started. Okay, we ready to go? We have a lot of folks on participants, which is really exciting. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Matt Lurie and I'm the Shoreline Armoring Implementation Strategy Lead with WDFW, supporting the Habitat Strategic Initiative Lead Team, or HSIL. I'm thrilled to help introduce today's webinar, Beach Strategies, a web-based tool for nearshore restoration and protection in Puget Sound. This project complements several of our program's recent investments in analyzing current and future conditions of Puget Sound and accelerating process-based restoration. Before we get too far, a few housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be put on the HSIL website, and I'm happy to share that link around when it's available. We are also planning on having time for questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to also put questions in the chat and I'll try to keep track of those and I can help facilitate those questions to the project team. Before we get too far, also a little bit more about my team. HSIL is an interagency team supporting the National Estuary Program, co-led by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and Washington Department of Natural Resources. Our focus is on advancing Puget Sound recovery through collaborative planning and strategic investments. We award grants with Puget Sound geographic funds through a cooperative agreement with EPA in support of the Puget Sound Action Agenda and implementation strategies. One of the reasons this is exciting is because these dollars go towards traditionally difficult to fund actions that catalyze greater opportunities for recovery. You can click the next slide, please. The project you will hear about today directly advances the shoreline armoring implementation strategy, which addresses a legacy of hard armor installation along Puget Sound shorelines, which has many ecological impacts and often does not adequately protect property as intended. If you're keeping track at home, this strategy is very closely aligned with Action Agenda Strategy 3, Healthy Shorelines. The implementation strategy's goal is to reduce the impacts of shoreline armor so that biogeophysical processes are not impeded, including the supply and movement of sediment. This will improve the function of nearshore systems and provide the habitat necessary to sustain a diverse and resilient marine food web. A functioning nearshore also provides beaches for recreation and protection of properties by natural replenishment of beach material. Next slide, please. Beach Strategies advances outcomes within the long-term strategic planning approach, describes shoreline attributes, and provides science-based tools and data metrics that inform improved habitat restoration and protection decision-making at different spatial scales in Puget Sound. Even though the HSIL funded portion of this work is coming to a close, I'm really looking forward to seeing this work being used on the ground and in the water. And I think you're going to be really impressed when the project team shows you the interactive tool where you and your partners can quickly overlay where the shoreline armor is, where drift cells and feeder bluffs are, where forage fish spawning sites are, and how that might inform shoreline management. Next slide, please. One more note from our team is that if you want to get more information on HSIL, please visit our webpage. I'll drop the link in the chat shortly. We have some great blogs that are coming out regularly, and you can also see our recent our recent full list of awards and a recent round of funding. So next slide, please. I'm really excited about the discussion today, and I've shared my information here. Next slide. Now I'd like to introduce the project team. Panelists, I'll call on you, and if you could say your position and role. So why don't we start with Tish and Jay?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tish Conway-Prentice. I'm the Nearshore Science Manager with the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program here in the Habitat Program of the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife.
And I'm Jay Krenitz. I'm the ESRP Program Manager, Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program Manager, in the same place as Tish.
Okay, next if we could go to Rachel and Ryan.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Bouchelon. I'm a GIS analyst in the admin division of Habitat Program, and my coworker Ryan and I have been working and supporting the Beach Strategies project for a couple years now. So we're excited to be here.
And I'll just let everybody know I have a meeting owl, and it's me and Tish and Rachel all in the same room. So you'll see me lit up when Tish and Rachel are both talking.
Great. Yeah. Ryan, are you going to jump on, or it's okay if not? Maybe not.
Oh,
okay. We can introduce him later. Let's go ahead and jump over to the Herrera team, maybe. Andrea and Lauren, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Andrea McLennan. I'm a senior coastal geomorphologist at Herrera, and I've been involved with the Beach Strategies project since its inception close to a decade ago, which was kind of insane, but yeah, I'm really glad to be here, and thanks so much for inviting us to attend the phase 3 results. I'll pass it off to Lauren.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lauren Odie Giles. I'm a GIS analyst also with Herrera. I've been working on beach strategies, following Andrea around for as long as I've been in the industry. So it's been really cool to see this project go through so many phases and get to a place where people really get to make good action happen with it. Yeah, thanks again for the invitation.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to our panelists. It's going to be a great presentation. You're in for a treat. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Tish.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt, for that great introduction. I just wanted to also acknowledge that we've got Jen Burke from Puget Sound Partnership and Sydney Fishman from Department of Ecology who are here with us today. They are two members of our longstanding Beach Strategies Steering Committee, which has morphed over the years, but we've been really grateful for their guidance over the years. Okay, so let me do this. Okay, so just to quickly give you a little bit of an outline for what what our presentation will look like. Jay is going to give an introduction to the Estuarine Salmon Restoration Program. I will give an overview of the Beach Strategies Project. Rachel and Ryan will give an interactive tour of the hub site and Data Explorer. And then we'll come back to me for some wrap up and questions. So take it away, Jay.
All right. Two quick things as I get started. Where am I here? How come I can't find me? Oh, there's technology. There we are. Okay. Thank you. Great. Yeah, two things. One, if anybody does have questions, there actually isn't a chat for participants. There's a Q&A. Go ahead and put anything into the Q&A as those questions arise. Put them in there, and we at the end of the presentation we'll just start taking off through them and do our best to answer those questions. And then the other thing is, like Andrea had said, this has been going on for almost a decade, and this project was saved from the ashes. It was one of those projects at the cutoff line, and we got it funded, and it has exceeded our expectations, and it's been an incredible. It's been a lot of fun and a great project to work on. I'm so excited for where we are today. This is kind of a big reveal for a lot of what we've been working on for a long time. So thank you all for coming and for hearing what's going on. So just to provide this framework for those of you who don't know, is that the Estuarine Salmon Restoration Program started out of the Puget Sound Nearshore Ecosystem Restoration Project, which was a 20-year-long, $20 million science investigation into Puget Sound. So Tish is going to talk a little bit about that, but out of that came ESRP to start implementing those science actions that were identified and developed back in 2006 when we started. We do locally developed, regionally prioritized projects in process-based restoration. We also do science investigations, and also have a strong component of our program that accelerates armor removal in Puget Sound. We do have a focus on the beach system. But in addition to beaches, you can go next slide, ESRP looks at the entire nearshore and thinks about those processes that we want to restore at that core level of degradation to restore the ecosystem function. And we look at the Puget Sound shoreline within those different components of river deltas, coastal inlets, barrier embayments, and beaches and bluffs. So in this is a tool that is really helping us and helping the whole community to think about how we can go about restoring the beach parts of that system. So next slide. So like I said, we focus on process, structure, and function. Tish is going to go more into that, but this is going to be, not only are we looking across Puget Sound nearshore, but this is the beach portion of those processes, and how do we go about restoring and protecting those things? And what are the anticipated functions that we think are most likely to come out of those target ecosystem processes that we're looking at? Next slide. So we have a portfolio within ESRP. Beaches is part of that, but we have large restoration and protection projects. When I say protection, that's acquisition for protection of intact processes. We have a learning program. Those are pre-designed projects that inform the future restoration projects or protection projects. We also have two other investment types within ESRP that targets armor removal. That's our shore-friendly local programs, where we work with local organizations who offer incentives, technical assistance, and support for smaller actions on shorelines with private waterfront homeowners. And then we also have small grants that is specifically targeted at armor removal. And that's to help us continue to take these injuries off the shoreline. So go ahead, next slide. So when we think about the beach system, there is a unique social and cultural context. When I think about these different components of the Puget Sound shoreline, they each have different features about them. In the beach system, it's a very long stretch of shoreline. It's the biggest part of the shoreline. When I think about the human organism, I think about like our skin is the largest organ in our body. So I think the beach system is very similar to that. There are a lot of small private parcels. The system itself is hugely important. And there's been lots and lots and lots of small injuries that are having a large impact on shoreline function. So a lot of these projects are often lower cost, and individually, as an individual project, can have a lower benefits. But we need to look across the system and think about how do we focus and target our investments so that we can get the kind of ecosystem lift that we need to restore the functions that we rely on the shorelines. It's also a place where we're going to see some of the biggest impacts of sea level rise. So I'm going to turn it over to Tish now to talk about Pisner.
Okay, thanks, Jay. So as Jay mentioned, the foundation of ESRP is in the Puget Sound Nearshore Ecosystem Restoration Project, which was a collaboration between DFW and the Army Corps and generated this amazing body of science that became the foundation for ESRP. So there was a geomorphic classification of Puget Sound. There was a really great historic change analysis. There was some guidance about the principles for conservation and restoration, strategic needs assessment, and the strategies for nearshore restoration and protection. And this is just like a handful of them. There's a lot more. And so of all of this, here we go. There was feasibility for and congressional approval for 12 particular projects, 3 of which were identified to move forward. And then also the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program was created to start doing some projects that were according to this body of science. And then we also acquired Shore Friendly, which is a wonderful way to connect with shoreline landowners. So this is sort of our body of work that was the foundation for our program. And so with this, we have 90% of our appropriation goes to process-based restoration in Puget Sound, and 10% can go to research projects that inform restoration, and we call these pre-design projects. And this is really, we call this the learning program. And so this is, these are projects that are intended to inform and improve the way that we do restoration. And so we can think of learning projects as kind of generally falling into these 3 broad buckets of looking at some kind of ecosystem response to restoration, developing a planning tool, or looking at a predictive model or developing a predictive model of a process that we're interested in. And beach strategies is very much in the planning tool sort of bucket of the learning program. And one thing that we really love to do is connect with the restoration practice community. And there's a feedback between the body of science that we create and the restoration community. And this is part of our programmatic adaptive management for improving the way we do restoration over time. So as Jay mentioned, we understand that ecosystem structure and function are linked to habitat forming processes, and these processes are the targets of our restoration. And this is one of the major things that came out of the Pisner project. And what this means is that when we're thinking about restoration, rather than asking what a species needs and building that, we are trying to alleviate the source of impairment to the process that's forming the habitat. And so what do I mean by that? Well, here is this beautiful diagram showing a series of interconnected habitats in the nearshore where we have a river. And can you guys see my cursor? I don't know.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So we have a river delta coming down and forming salt marshes. There's mud flats, there's beaches and sand spits, kelp and eelgrass beds, rocky shores and cliffs and bluffs and lagoons. So this is this diverse, interconnected series of habitats in the nearshore. And then we can ask ourselves, what are the processes that create and maintain this physical landscape? And these are our targets for restoration actions in this nearshore system. So this is sediment input from rivers or from eroding bluffs, sediment transport. Once it's in the river, it's got to go somewhere, tidal flow, erosion, and the flip side of erosion, accretion, channel migration and formation, Freshwater input is itself an important process. My personal favorite always, detritus import and export, the invisible engine of our nearshore food webs, the exchange of aquatic organisms, and solar incidents. So these are sort of our raw materials for targeting in our restoration. So now we're going to zoom in a little bit on beaches, right? And so I'm just going to like show you sort of where we see some beaches in this diagram. And let's just acknowledge, of course, that they exist within this matrix of nearshore habitats. And we also can start to see that processes function at broader scales than single restoration projects. And so because of this, we need to take a landscape approach or considerations to inform restoration actions. And that, I think, really provides the kind of the backbone for a lot of this beach strategies work, is acknowledging that there are different spatial scales that these processes are occurring at, and trying to capture that with data. So I'm going to introduce the beach strategies team now, just because they did the vast majority of this work. And so Andrew McLennan, she's here on the call today, Jim Johannesson, Lauren Odie-Giles, Allison Lubeck, Brandon Rischel, Paul Schlinger, and Jen Schmidt all had major parts in this work, and it would not have been possible without their hard work and effort over the many years. And then, of course, there are these major products that emerge from each phase, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we have the phase 1 report, CGS 2017, the phase 2 report, CGS 2020, and the hub site that we're here to talk to you about today with phase 3. Okay, so the overarching goal of beach strategies is to develop science-based recommendations for restoring and protecting processes for beach systems in Puget Sound based on spatial data. Okay, so phase 1 was all about the data, the spatial data improvement, and this predated myself at DFW and also involved a lot of end user outreach. Phase 2 was all about making an evaluation framework based on that spatial data, and also involved a lot of outreach. And then phase 2 is this web-based tool to make it hopefully as easy as possible to use and to understand what the metrics mean. And as you'll see, this is no small feat because there's a lot of data and it's really complicated. So doing our best to make it really accessible for different kinds of users. Sorry, I'm going to just move this maybe back up here so I can see. Okay, so we also had stewardship recommendations, models for updating metrics with new data, and a template geodatabase for farmer data. So lots of really exciting things with phase 3. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what are we talking about when we say processes in the nearshore exactly? And I'm just going to confess that before I came to Puget Sound in my marine ecology background, I had never heard the word drift cell until Megan DeTier mentioned it or used it in a talk that she was giving to NOAA about the big armor project that they did. So I was like, what is a drift cell? So this is a very simplified sort of schematic or illustration of the way that winds are pushing water towards the shore. This is moving the sediment in a directional way. And again, this is super simplified, happening over geologic time, but it's showing that at the end of the drift cell, you see a spit forming over time. There can be a lagoon forming behind the spit. And then we see erosion from a bluff at the other end of the drift cell. So this is just a nice visual depiction of how sediment supply and drift cells kind of can work in a very simplified way. So this is a map showing how complex it is in the nearshore. So we've got wind and waves, tides and currents, geology, topography, and bathymetry all working together to drive the way that sediment is moving along our shorelines. And so in this diagram, these little dotted areas are bluffs, and then these arrows represent drift cells. And here we see the predominant wind direction. So even in this like a very small chunk of Puget Sound, there's a lot going on with respect to the way the drift cells are moving. And this is from David Finlayson's PISNERP report. And also I will just say, if you like if you're interested in feeder bluffs, I would recommend his dissertation for reading, along with McLennan 2013 and Shipman 2014 ecology reports are just some really great resources for feeder bluffs. But anyway, so showing that this is this complexity on the shoreline, and then we zoom out and it's even more complex, right? So we just have this very complicated matrix of drift cells moving in different directions and of different lengths all around Puget Sound. And of course, we know we have a lot of armor. And this depiction is kind of looking like it's everywhere, but it's not. It's in a very defined places, and so because of this, we need to do a spatial analysis. This is really what prompted this spatial exercise to develop strategic recommendations. And so what, again, like, let's zoom in a little more. What is a drift cell? So this is a great graphic that was put together by CGS 2020, where we have these sort of nested spatial scales where we've got a drift cell, and here the net drift is moving from left to right. But we see in these feeder bluffs, and an exceptional feeder bluff here, this is a divergence zone. So some of the drift is moving off to the right to another drift cell, and some of it's moving into the drift cell that is in this depiction. And so we've got the shore forms are our feeder bluffs, and then we have some transport zones here in green, and accretion shore forms, and here we have an embayment at the end of the drift cell. So this is what we're talking about when we start to zoom in and talk about our sediment source as the feeder bluffs. And then we have the rest of the drift cell that is potentially seeing the effects of that intact sediment source or an impaired sediment source. And so what this means is that we've got this sort of interplay where we have this broader spatial scale of the drift cell, where actions in the sediment supply could affect the rest of the drift cell that's downdrift. And then we also have, say, an area of the drift cell where, if we're thinking about restoration, we should probably be thinking about whether the sediment supply is intact or not. So sort of this two-way spatial dialogue of understanding what's going on at the broader scale and also at the smaller scale. So how much of Puget Sound is even in drift cells? Well, we know this from CGS 2017, a little more than half, or 1,300 or so miles of Puget Sound shoreline is in these drift cells. And then we can also say that we can also look at the feeder bluffs and where they are in Puget Sound with respect to counties. And you can see the blue here are feeder bluffs, and the purple are exceptional feeder bluffs. So we know a little bit about how they're distributed around the Sound. And then we can also know from this great illustration by Simone DeRoche that was part of our summit proceedings, that it's wonderful, showing some of the structure and function that's connected to having intact processes in Puget Sound. So just acknowledging that the structure and function that we are interested in is sort of dependent in beach systems for having intact sediment supply. And I'll also just acknowledge that we know that some sediment is, of course, entering the system via, say, small streams. So the feeder bluffs are not the only game in town, but they're a very important one. Okay, so building on the PSNRP strategies, this is Cherigino et al. 2012, and the sort of the overall goal is informing process-based restoration in the shorelines. And so, as Jay mentioned, these strategies, they cover beaches, coastal inlets, barrier embayments, and deltas. And the work that we're talking about today is really building on the beach component. So the Beach Strategies Project updated a lot of the spatial data from PSNRP. It now has recommendations at multiple spatial scales, not just the scale of the process unit, or in shorelines, that's a drift cell. Multiple modules, so helping helping users can pick what area of interest they have, and then the end user can also determine the management type that they're interested in based on their work. And as I mentioned, this was all informed by user input at multiple steps along the way. So this is just a really short overview of the spatial data improvements from phase 1. So there was a really great compilation of shore armor, and some additional mapping of shore armor in places that needed it the most. There was shore type mapping, and this is a little nerdy, but they were sort of conflating shore type and armor. And here they can, and here we have a way that is separating the armor from the geomorphic shore type in a way that was much easier to analyze, as well as mapping a lot of pocket beaches. So a much more accurate assessment of where the pocket beaches are now. Updated layers for fetch and erosion potential, net shore drift mapping, including a better delineation of divergence zones, and also making one-dimensional maps of every drift cell to understand where things are along the drift cell. And then parcel data, whether it is residential or non-residential. So a really giant data collection, data compilation effort. And then phase 2 was developing recommendations for restoration project sponsors, evaluators, and planners, and developing a set of protection recommendations and restoration recommendations. And I'll talk to you more about this in a second, but basically using aspects or using metrics of process degradation and potential benefit, which is the framework that was also used by Cheragino et al. And so just to reiterate, these are not intended to really provide a single answer, kind of top-down prescriptive answer like here it is and walk away, but rather to empower users with information to help with planning and prioritization. And the recommendations is one really important output from this data set, but I will also say that the data themselves are also fascinating and really well worth diving into. And we hope that we have provided a way to do that with the hub site. Okay, so what do the recommendations mean? So they consider both process degradation and potential benefit. And so here's just this diagram showing that we've got process degradation on the x-axis, potential benefit on the y-axis. And so the recommendations reflect sort of where you are in this two-dimensional space. So if it's restore high, it's lower degradation and higher benefit. And if it's restore low, it's lower degradation and lower benefit. Enhance is high degradation and low benefit, and enhance high is high degradation but high benefit. So these recommendations are sort of reflecting where the part of the shoreline is landing in this space. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I sort of walk you through what the user might do as they use this tool. So they pick a management priority, and this can be sediment supply, forage fish, or pocket beaches. Pick a management strategy, that would be restoration or protection. Pick a spatial scale, sound wide or drift cell, shore form, or bluffs. And then review additional data and integrate local data. These are really important steps of these are a starting point, our recommendations and the data's underlying data. So say we do that, we pick sediment supply, restoration, drift cell, and then we can look at both process degradation and potential benefit. So for sediment supply and drift cells, the process degradation is the proportion of the sediment supply that is armored. And so that's the degradation metric, and that informs the x-axis of that matrix. And then the potential benefit is asking what the longest unarmored bluff, potential unarmored bluff would be. So taking the longest bluff and looking at the armor that's next to it as the proportion of the sediment supply. And then the length of the drift cell scaled from 0 to 1. So longer drift cells are getting a higher potential benefit. And then together, these inform the y-axis for this matrix. And so with that information, every drift cell can have a recommendation based on this framework. And then we can also take the same thing and take it down one spatial layer, down to armored bluffs for restoration. And again, here the sediment supply or the process degradation is still at the drift cell scale. So it's inheriting, or it's acknowledging this sort of process that's occurring at a broader scale. So proportion of the sediment supply that's armored, the same two drift cell scale metrics for process or for potential benefit at the drift cell scale, but then also a couple at the shore form scale. So asking how continuous the sediment supply is or how fragmented it is, how intact is the feeder bluff of interest. And so these are at the shore form scale, and then some additional potential benefit metrics at the bluff scale itself. So where is it in the drift cell? What proportion of the sediment supply is that armored bluff? Is it in a divergence zone? And is it adjacent, or is it an exceptional feeder bluff? So this is the suite of metrics also at the bluff scale. So these nested spatial scales informing the potential benefit metrics, add them up, and that's the y-axis. So this is what that looks like. And then this is just kind of zoomed in on a little chunk of Puget Sound, showing each line is an armored bluff and the color represents the recommendation. So that's just a very brief example of how this works and the way that these quantitative metrics that are spatial and occurring at multiple scales are informing the recommendations. And then, of course, we have these for sediment supply, for forage fish, and for pocket beaches. And this is the evaluation framework for this work. And then now I'm going to talk about phase 3, which was taking all of this amazing data and making a beautiful website to describe it and host it. So this was funded by the Habitat Strategic Initiative. We now have this hub site with the background, the data, and the methods. We have a data explorer. We looked at use cases to sort of help frame how we wanted to depict the information. So we thought about project planners, project applicants, reviewers, researchers, and educators and communicators as potential audiences for people that might be interested in this hub site and wanting to make it accessible for people who maybe have a pretty casual understanding of beaches and beach systems, or for people who like love data and love numbers and want to just jump right in there and look at all the data. So that was our goal, and I guess you guys can tell us how well we did, and we're always looking to improve it over time, of course. We also, and this was work that was led by Herrera, we have data stewardship recommendations. We have code for more nimbly updating the data and the recommendations. We have a geodatabase template now for when new armor data is collected. And so now I'm going to switch gears and pass it off to Rachel, who will take us on a tour of the hub site.
All right, thanks, Tish. Give me a second to get this pulled up. Good to see everyone again. I now have the luxury of presenting a couple things that I did not create myself. So if anything goes wrong, I have no responsibility. No, just kidding. I did a good bit of work on this too, so I am also culpable. So yeah, here it is. This is the culmination of a lot of work by a lot of people. This is the Beach Strategies ArcGIS hub site, which someone on the panel could throw the link in the chat. That would be great. But this was, a big part of the phase 3 of Beach Strategies, coming up with this site to sort of contextualize all of that information that Tish just talked about and make it a little bit easier to access and digest and understand. At least that's the hope. So this is the hub site that Herrera created for us as part of this project, and we've added a little bit to it since then. Since Tish went into a lot of the details about, why we care about this and how the metrics were created and all that sort of thing, I won't dwell too much on that. Just sort of briefly show the main pages of the hub site, learning about why we care, like Tish just presented on in this role of Nearshore Ecosystems tab. Understanding the results helps break down some of, where those metrics came from, what they mean. So I definitely encourage folks to check this page out. There was a lot of information that you just heard from Tish. And so if you need more time to digest it and just want more guidance on what all those things meant, this is a great page for that. Breaks it down pretty well. And so before I go to explore the data, I also just wanted to point out some things in the resources tab. For those of you who are very interested in the data itself and just want to get your hands on it and look at it, there's this Get the Data page, which allows you to download phase 1 and phase 2 data, along with this data dictionary that Tish put together that describes all of the different layers and attributes and calculations for each of the fields in these data sets. So that's a really handy resource as well. Let's see what else. Project history, obviously talks about the project a little bit, but there are these resources down here as well where you can get to the reports. And the data dictionary again, and a few other things. So that's a useful page. And then data stewardship discusses, how we're going to maintain this data, because right now, all of the data that went into creating the 2020 management recommendations is now a few years out of date. So this talks about how we plan to make that data more current. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to point out is this feedback page. And so if you have feedback about the hub site itself, there's a survey form for that. And then also if you have feedback about the data itself, an area that doesn't look right or looks out of date, or you just want to help us keep that updated, there's a separate survey form for that. So this is the hub site. It's lovely. Encourage everyone to check it out. Now I'm going to switch over to the Explore the Data page, which this web application is the part that my teammate Ryan Gatchell created to help facilitate looking at all of this information. As you can see, you can access it here in the page, but for better user experience, I encourage you to open it in a new tab. So I'm going to do that now. And so this is what the Data Explorer looks like. So there's a lot going on here, and I'm just going to go piece by piece, but sort of the use case that Tish walked us through a couple minutes ago, where you select, what module you're interested in, whether you're interested in restoration or protection, what spatial scale you're interested in. There's just a lot of different ways to filter this data. And so, let's look at sediment supply. You can see the map updates when I choose protection instead. If I wanted to remove the enhance or, any of the restore recommendations, the map updates as I do that as well. So it's just another way to easily visually filter all of this information. And you can see over here in the layer list too, if you want to just explore it yourself, you can turn the layers on and off and go about it that way. But with this guided data exploration widget, another cool thing is the ability to output this data. So instead of downloading just the full phase 2 geodatabase with all these management recommendations, you can make these selections and then choose how you want to export it. And it's just a subset of that data. You've got a few different options here. Obviously, I do not endorse shapefile for a variety of reasons, but a lot of the field names in this data set are pretty long and exceed the 10-character limit imposed by shapefiles. So you'll get some meaningless field names if you do that, but it's there if you want it. So that part is really cool, allows you to sort of narrow your focus in on the data that you're interested in, depending on what you're looking for, what your goals are. I also want to point out that within these pop-ups for any of the spatial scales and any of the modules, you get some basic information about what those metric values are for that particular drift cell or bluff or whatever that Tish mentioned. Can link back to the hub site if you need more information on what the metrics mean. But one thing that we're most excited about is there is this download report button in each of the pop-ups, and it's up and running, it's functional. It's really exciting. We're excited to present it to everyone. It takes about 15 seconds right now to generate a report, and we're working on optimizing that. But just know that if you click on it and you see the little circle telling you it's working, just be patient, it'll get there, because these reports are being generated dynamically. So it's drawing from live data basically. But to save you 15 seconds, I will just pull up the report from that drift cell that I was focused on. And so, yeah, it generates a couple pages about, where you get a map of where the drift cell is, what armored shoreline might be in that drift cell, what shore types are there. And then get a whole bunch of information about just generally what's going on in that drift cell, as well as these metrics that we've been talking about so much. And so you can just, in one place, one-stop shop, very easily see a lot of information about a given spatial scale, whether it's the pocket beaches or the bluffs or the drift cells, as well as these ever important management recommendations that all of this work sort of culminated in. So like I said, we're very excited about this. This is cool functionality. Hopefully it makes it easy for people to just visit a particular area that they're interested in and just get information quickly that will help guide whatever restoration or whatever work is going on in that area. And so there is a different report for each spatial scale. I won't spend too long on this, but you can see for unarmored bluffs, same kind of thing. There's all of the potential benefit metrics, the degradation metric, and management recommendations. Armored bluff, more or less the same thing. And then finally, the pocket beaches, all of the relevant information for those. So those are the reports. And then the last couple of things that I wanted to point out over here on the left. There's this little information page that links you back to the hub site again, if you need it. There's another link to the data dictionary to help understand all the metrics and all the attributes in these data sets. And then finally, there's this little download link over here where you can get, you can access the phase 1 and 2 data and all of those reports for the different phases. So there, we hope that we've linked to these resources in a lot of different places, so it makes it easier for folks to access them. You know, if you're going through this and you need a refresher on what all this stuff means, and yeah, have it in multiple places that's hopefully easy to find. So I think with that, is there anything else that you guys wanted me to point out about it, or are we good?
No, it was great.
All right, I'm gonna hand it back to Tish.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Okay, share screen. Okay. Okay, so it's important to always talk about the limitations of the data and to know where they came from and what they show. So we know that we still have older and coarser scale shore armor data in a lot of places. The DFW forage fish spawning data is what's used for the forage fish module, and it's an amazing data set, but it wasn't really created for this use. It's possible that there are false negatives in it, places where there are no data. And also we know that the way that the map is drawing lines assumes a sort of linear or a uniform certainty around a point where data were collected, and that's probably not true. It's probably has some shape to that that is not reflected in the data right now. And I can advance my slide. This is a very focused, of course, on shoreline armor as a primary source of process degradation, rightfully so, but there are also other sources of anthropogenic degradation, including groins and fill, overwater structure, upland conditions that this data set doesn't currently capture. Our intention is to update it, but not in real time and not all the time. So by definition, at any moment, there will be potentially a mismatch between what's showing in the data set and the real world. And just acknowledging it's best used for planning or evaluating potential restoration projects in conjunction with local data. So it's a knowledge is power kind of situation where this is just a really great, amazing set of information to help, we hope, our restoration community understand their shoreline of interest even better. So where are we going with this? A lot of places. This is really an exciting time. So we are planning a metric rerun, looking at, we know that Friends of San Juan have done a new armor mapping effort for that county, for San Juan County, and we would love to include that in our data set. We would also, while we do that, it would make a lot of sense to get the most recent forage fish data as well. And then we also know that we have the potential for a barrier embayment strategy, which will be based on a lot of this shoreline data led by Herrera and Blue Coast that we anticipate to be funded in the next biennium. So that will be really exciting work. And then we also have some additional spatial data sets that are in development. And this is with Kramer Fish Sciences, a marine riparian data set and barriers to tidal connectivity data set that could also play very nicely, I think, with some of these concepts. And then there are other potential directions. And this is just a laundry list, really. There's a lot of different ways to take these data. So there's a project at UW led by Jason Toft, looking at ecological function of bluffs that could set the stage for some kind of function component to this work. We could also start thinking about the upland or watershed information, stream mouths, overwater structures, sea level rise, kelp and eelgrass, environmental justice. These are just some of the ways that we could, some spatial data sets or ways that we could think about these data in the future. So with that, I just want to thank again the amazing Beach Strategies team, Andrea, Jim, Lauren, Paul, Allison, and Brandon, and our amazing steering committee, Jen, Jason, Sydney, Jennifer, Hugh, Randy, and Matt. We're just so grateful for the amazing input over time. I am really glad that our hub site captures a video of Hugh on the shoreline talking about feeder bluffs. It's like his wise voice is now sort of forever part of this project, and I'm delighted for that. I also want to thank everyone who came to the workshops in phases 1 and 2. We really took all of that advice to heart every time, and we're just so grateful for everyone's participation, especially in this crazy world where everyone is really busy. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank at our Puget Sound Restoration and Nearshore sections at DFW, Nearshore Science, for giving us some helpful tips on building this talk. So thanks again, and we've got some time for questions.
Okay. Spotlight.
Great. Well, that was an amazing presentation. It's just so cool to see it all come together. I'm looking at the clock. We have about 10 minutes for questions in our time. If folks want to raise their hand and come on camera and ask questions, we can do that. While we're waiting, I do see one question in the Q&A that maybe the project team could answer, and that is the data in this tool static, or will WDFW be updating it, and how often?
Yes, it is static, and yes, we do intend to update it, but not all the time, every couple years. So it will depend on what we're able to do. So what we will do is have it be very clear when the data were updated at any given moment. So we will do a very good job annotating when the last update was and for what. But I know that we are hoping to do a big update this summer.
Great. I'm not seeing any hand raised unless others are, but there is one more question in the Q&A, and that is, are you incorporating upland land uses?
No, the extent of armor is the source of degradation in the data set right now, but that could certainly be something that we include, although I guess I'll say we have parcels and we show whether they're residential or non-residential. So to the extent that the land use in that sort of ownership bucket, but not other aspects of land use than parcel ownership.
Right.
And I guess I want to also, I'm looking at Andrea, who knows the data really well. At any moment, Andrea, just feel free to chime in.
Okay, I will. There was one thing I wanted to mention about the data that I think some people that love GIS and shorelines may be interested in, and that's the linear referencing routes, and that we kind of, enabled people to identify where the different shore forms, or kind of like where they're located within that gradient of the net shore drift cell. So you can understand like the condition of the updrift sediment supply relative to the downdrift habitats. So there are other neat applications, I think, for that tool, and it's included in the phase 1 geodatabase, and it was used to kind of draw the connections in the between the sediment supply and habitats in the forage fish spawning module. And it was also used in kind of some of the drafty metrics that we developed that will be used in the embayment strategies, because it's really critical to understand, you know, the sediment supply supporting the barriers that front barrier embayments, and particularly their vulnerability in the context of sea level rise.
We even asked CGS to make a video tour of the data for phase 1, and to the smooth sounds of Brandon Rochelle, if you would like to.
Yes.
Great. Couple more questions here. How do you envision this data being used by individuals at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife?
Well, we do a lot of things here at our agency, so I would say it depends on the specific role of the person. But I think that for anyone, this data set can help understand what is happening at the drift cell scale. So for any sort of part of the shoreline that one is caring about for a variety of reasons, you can say, okay, I'm in this drift cell. What does the sediment supply look like? How armored is it? Where is the most of the armor? Is it towards the beginning or towards the end of the drift cell? It just helps give a sense of how processes are functioning at that broader scale in relationship to the area of interest.
Yeah, I'll add to that real quick. Is, you know, this project was designed and built targeting multiple kinds of users, and we did have those users participate in the development of the projects. And a target audience, kind of like level 1, is the restoration community. But we knew that this would be really valuable to the planning community as well, both at the local and state agency levels. And so, yeah, it's great data and information. Go try it out and let us know how you're using it, and you know how we might even think about improving it in the future.
And that actually ties into another question that came in, which I believe you've answered, which is, who do you all see as the optimum audience for the hub site? Sounds like could be a lot of use cases.
Yeah, I think that's I think Jay nailed it.
Great. Another question is, can you talk a bit more about what a barrier embayment strategy is and how it might be integrated into beach strategies?
Yes. Hi, Ian. Well, so we know that barrier embayments are dependent on sediment supply from their drift cells for the formation of their barriers, at least to some degree. So we can use the shoreline data that we already have, but with that accretion shore form and tidal wetland component as a target. So CGS did a lot of foundational work for this as part of the original Beach Strategies project. And I think that a better understanding of the wetlands or the mapping of the barrier embayments would be maybe a place to start, or with respect to spatial data sets that would inform that in strategy. But I think there also could be other ones. So the barrier embayment strategy work is the first step is like getting the people in the room to talk about what data sets to start improving. It's rather than knowing that from the beginning. And Andrea, if you want to speak to that, I'm happy to hear your perspective too.
Sure. You know, you know, there's a lot of limitations in data sets, as you know, like every data set has its limitations. And we, both of the data sets that we were using focused on, barrier embayments or barrier beaches in general, were limited. There are accretion shore forms within the CGS feeder bluff mapping topology, which don't necessarily identify if there's a landward embayment. And then there are barrier embayments from the change analysis that include a lot of systems that aren't really functioning anymore. And so that was one of the main limitations that we were struck with in the embayment work that was done as part of the beach strategies project. I think future embayments embayment work will be focused on really making sure that this is the barrier that we're interested in, the one that's fronting the embayment with all of these habitats. So that's that's a pretty critical piece. And then linking that with the condition of the sediment sources and a lot of other site-specific information that kind of has continued to develop in recent years.
Right.
Andrea had mentioned the change analysis, and that's a Pisner technical report. And we talked about that. I'm going to put a link to the Puget Sound Pisner technical reports in the chat.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Simon Stead et al. 2011.
Well, I want to just be mindful of time. If the panelists are open to it, perhaps they could stay on for a few more minutes, and there's still a few questions. But I do, great. In case people need to hop off, just thanks for joining. But we're going to stay on for a few more minutes and round out a few more Q&A questions. The next question that I have, which you might have already answered, but just in case, how is the enhance versus restoration category applied across the landscape? And can you give specific examples for enhance versus restore?
Yes, kind of. I am going to go to, what's the best slide? I'm not sure if this is the very best one, but oh, did I stop? Okay, that is not what I meant to do. So
Okay.
sorry.
Now it's the after hours part of the show.
Sorry. Okay. Am I sharing again now?
You're sharing again.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not sure this is the very best slide to illustrate this, but it's a great question, Allison. And so this is just showing this sort of two-dimensional space of process degradation and potential benefit, either at whatever spatial scale of interest. And so the bins are defined by natural breaks in the data, and then they are just the recommendations are applied to the bins using this matrix as a guide. So let me see, let me go back to the question. So enhance is in this space of high degradation, whereas restore is a lower degradation space. And then when we talk about degradation here, it's of processes. So if it's a restoration recommendation, it's sort of acknowledging that one might be, oh my God, it might be possible to restore the habitat forming process, whereas the enhanced recommendations are acknowledging that it might not be possible to get to that restoration of process, but maybe there are other kinds of actions that are really appropriate. And so beach nourishment might be an example there that could be something that might be applied where it's not possible to restore this the process. And yeah, and acknowledging like any data set, especially when there are sort of human categories placed onto this data set, it's worth looking at the numbers themselves, because if you notice that you're sort of on the brink between restore and enhance, that can be part of your narrative. Like, okay, in the strict restoration, the strict recommendation was, we say, restore low, But I think enhancement actions are super appropriate in this site for that reason, or vice versa. So I would encourage looking at the Y and X axis values as a way to help contextualize the recommendations, so that one can sort of see where you are in that spectrum of data that all feed into a particular recommendation.
And also just remember too, is this, in this case, this is about restoration of sediment supply. Like you'd said, the process, you may have another target or another management objective that could have, if we did a different module, could look a little different. And then, local priorities are going to be different everywhere. You might, so again, this is why we always call it decision support tool, not a decision tool.
Yeah, and go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that it's really this break between what we call restoration and enhancement is really driven by some of the restoration ecology literature and conservation biology literature that found greater certainty in the recovery following restoration in more intact landscapes. So landscapes with a lower level of degradation. And so that's really what that line is. So the certainty of that recovery was much lower in a more degraded landscape. So that, I hope I phrase that in a more understandable way. And so that's really what we were trying to get at there, in that difference between where it's better to just enhance, just do beach nourishment, rather than process-based restoration. And in many cases, it may not be possible to do that, such as along the BNSF Causeway. And I just wanted to add one other thing to that, and that literature that really drove that delineation is it wasn't from the geomorphology literature. It was from the larger ecology literature. So its application in beaches is uncertain. There were definitely a lot of kind of conceptual linkages that we were making in the development of these metrics, and that was one of them.
Great. Oh, it's so great to have so many questions and great responses. The next one is, what type of detail is included in the armoring data in terms of the nature of the armoring? For example, does it include material, age, etc.?
That's a great question. Thanks, Jenny. So basically for the newer armor data that we have that information. So that would include Mason, Jefferson counties, and parts of Island County, and I'll let Andrea, and Shirley San Juan County, hopefully, I'm not sure. Yes, okay, great. So our new armor, the protocol that emerged in partnership with Puget Sound Partnership and the blank geodatabase that we have, all want to include data on not just the what it's made out of, but also the elevation, and also whether it's working or not in a very non-engineer opinion way, sort of like, does it seem to be functional? So, and I'm just eyeballing another question that was looking at asking about elevation. So we have that more detailed data as far as what the armor is made out of and other aspects of it, but only for some of Puget Sound.
Right. Next question, is the restoration focused on restoring sediment supply? Notice a comment on the website that restoration initiatives in areas where sediment supply are degraded are less likely to be successful. Thinking of restoration armor removal on beaches where sediment supply cannot be restored.
Yeah, to me, I think that speaks to the enhancement conversation. So thinking locally then about what can be done locally to improve the function of the habitat, given those constraints.
Right. Next one. What use examples have you included in reports or on the hub itself regarding how users might use the data? For example, hypothetical examples of use.
Yeah, I guess we've left it. We've we've walked the user through sort of in the decision tree that I went over, but as far as so asking, oneself, okay, am I wanting to think about sediment supply or forage fish or pocket beaches? That's what we have right now. And then is your main tool restoration or protection? And then also the spatial scale of interest. But I think that it depends. I mean, I think there could be, if you're a planner, you can sort of take a look at like, okay, what are all the restore highs in this area that I care about? Or you can take a more place-based approach and say, okay, I'm in an area, what's going on here with the sediment supply and the other aspects of the beach. So we haven't been particularly prescriptive about sort of putting ourselves in the space of our users and walking them through that way, other than that, those sort of initial triage points of about the module of which is forage fish or sediment supply or pocket beach, the spatial scale, and then certainly encouraging users to take the information and integrate their own data sets of interest as well as local data.
Right.
But yeah, project team, feel free to add anything.
Yeah, we designed this, like Tish had said, to be as accessible by many different kinds of users, whether you're a professional GIS person or you are a teacher in a class that is trying to teach their students about beaches and everybody in between. So yeah, I agree with what Tish had said.
Right. Next question, the restore recommendation is inclusive of the concept of identifying high priority protection locations, correct?
Hey, Ian, no. So in the data triage, if you want to do protection, you can get a separate set of recommendations for protection using this tool, which is a difference from the Cheragino recommendations, which had a sort of continuum from enhance to protect, whereas here the user decides what their management kind of lever is, restoration or protection, and gets a set of recommendations that reflect those. So there's protect high and protect remain in the protection matrix, which is a separate set of recommendations.
Right.
Yeah, that works for you.
And I guess he had a similar question about where there were blanks. So, or where there wasn't anything symbolized along the shoreline. And that may be because you're looking at just the bluff unit outputs or rather than the entire drift cell. It also may be if you're looking at an area that is an area with no appreciable drift. So it's outside of beach systems. So I hope that helps, Ian.
Right. Home stretch. I believe you've highlighted some of this already, but why was sediment supply selected as the process of primary interest?
Right, just because for our beach systems, it is the primary source of sediment to the beaches. So it's an important one for our beach systems. It's certainly not the only one, but it's one that is quite foundational to the structure and function of the system.
Great. And then last question, how are restored beaches mapped and do you categorize them as restored?
Oh, good question. No, I would say that's another another spatial data set that I would love to be reflected in our system, in our tool. We don't have that layer basically, and I would love to include it in the future.
Totally.
Okay. That's all the questions that I see. I don't know if there are any others coming in elsewhere, but if not, I want to thank the panelists for a great presentation. Maybe turn it back to Tish and Jay to wrap up.
Thanks everyone for coming. We're delighted to share this with the world, and send us your feedback. Go to the tool, poke around, see how it works for you, and let us know what you think.
We really do want to know how you're using it.
Yeah.
You know, lots of people build lots of tools and do lots of things that are intended to have a use. And all along, we knew that if we didn't involve the users at every step of the way, that we were at risk of developing something that people wouldn't use or care about. So this was our intention all along. So let us know if we succeeded in that. It's really, really important. We want this to be useful. We want this to grow as well, and to add new modules, add the embayment strategy. And we are continuing to think about that. I think we want this to be a great resource for everybody. So thank you.
Okay. Should we wrap?
Okay.
Thanks for
everyone.
listening. Thanks for
I'm gonna
listening.
press,
Thank you,
I'm gonna
everybody.
press end and everybody's gonna go away.
Okay.
So
Okay, bye.
Bye,
Bye,
thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Nice job,
Bye.
Tish and everybody.